UKIP's members and others who are passionate about the Leave campaign are not just single-issue Europhobes. They share a distinct agenda, mixing deep Euroscepticism with clear ideas about immigration, national identity, and the ways British society is changing for the worst, in their opinion. Significantly, UKIP members view the three main political parties as dominated by the highly educated, socially liberal people that are comfortable in the globalized world. They're all the same. Why vote for them? Tories, Liberals, Labour, they're all educated elites. They don't share our values. They are anywheres. And they are perceived as essentially alien and corrupt to the somewheres. Much like in the situation in the USA, UKIP's leadership and many of those leading the charge for Brexit and espousing economic nationalism, get rid of trade deals, close the borders, we need to make America first, Britain first, etc. The leaders of these populist groups actually are pursuing a kind of national neoliberalism. They still believe in inequality. They're not socialists by any means. They just think there should be inequality within one state. The Remain side was largely ineffectual and complacent during the Brexit campaign, believing it had the facts on its side until late in the campaign, when it turned to fear-mongering about the possible consequences of what it called a Brexecution. The inability of the Remain side to engage voters was made apparent on the 7th of June, just 2 weeks before the referendum, when 24% of voters said they felt well or very well informed about the issues. So only a quarter actually understood the issues. But very few people said they were going to change their minds about which way to go. They'd already made up their mind, and facts really didn't really play a part of it. The Leave side was effective in mobilizing people because it pretty much ignored facts altogether or just made them up. Indeed, many of its claims were debunked during the campaign as exaggerations, mischaracterizations, or outright lies. This is probably the most famous one. After the referendum, the independent authority in Britain charged with ensuring commercial advertising does not employ misleading claims indicated that a majority of the Leave campaign's claims plastered on its billboards and buses and leaflets would have been disallowed under its rules, compared to only a handful on the Remain side. But there is no authority policing political campaign claims, of course, for fear of impinging on free speech. But it's more than just lies and bending of the truth. It was Leave's campaign's emotional responses, rather than the rational ones, that made them connect with the populist sentiment. In particular, Leavers played on anxiety about immigration and resentment towards cosmopolitan elites. As Gove said on a television talk, to much applause at the time, quote, "The elites have done very well out of the EU. That's why they support it. But what about decent, ordinary people?" Unquote. Against the claims that EU migrants were overwhelming the established population, taking British jobs and stealing welfare benefits, the facts really don't bear out those claims. And I've got reams of statistics on this, I won't go into now. But the claims that were being made were totally false. There is, in fact, a clear racist undertone in much of what Farage's campaign was all about what he had to say about migration, Syrian refugee crisis, and Eastern European migrants. The fact is, Britain does already control its borders with regards to non-European migrants because it is not a so-called Schengen state. It processes asylum seekers because of other international treaty obligations, not EU ones. And compared to the rest of Europe, it received relatively few asylum applications. It's the EU average. Hungary has received a lot per capita. Germany, of course, has received the most total. Britain's right down here. The idea that the migrant crisis was somehow swamping Britain is just laughable. All right, to conclude. In the early and mid-20th century, nationalism was a powerful ideology that divided Europe and much of the world against itself. Although not its cause, appeals to nationalize mobilized millions to fight in World War I. Resurgent again in the interwar years, nationalism was further radicalized into the variety of ideologies we know as fascism. That radicalized nationalism fueled another even bigger war that took away tens of millions more lives. In other parts of the world across the 20th century, extreme nationalism has been the ideological force behind innumerable wars, genocides, and other atrocities. But the European integration project, begun in the aftermath of the Second World War, was supposed to stop this, at least in Europe, which had been the epicenter of nationalism to that point. The idea of a new Europe, begun with a partnership between France, Germany, Italy, and the Benelux countries, took root in the 1950s, and by 2010 had brought most of Europe together under its rubric. Supranationalist institutions, common economic interests, common social and legal protections, and a common European identity were all heralded as the antidote to nationalist division. It was argued that one could be a patriot of France or Germany or Britain and also be a citizen of Europe. The two were not thought to be incompatible. Now, for many in Europe, this has proved to be the case. But for others, particularly places like the UK, where European identity was always viewed with an ambivalent light, the pool of populist nationalism, or appealing to the somewheres, especially those in economically deprived areas, has been more effective. Now, this is not to diminish the inherent problems of the European Union. There is a real structural challenge and democratic deficits in the EU. No matter how often the European Parliament is trumpeted as representative, critics can rightly point to the fact that the Council of Ministers and the unelected Commission are far more important in decision-making in Europe. It's not for nothing that participation in European elections has steadily been declining across Europe, usually at rates that lag 40% below national elections. So typically in Britain, you only get 25% of the population voting in European elections. And as much as its social and legal policies protect citizens, its economic policies have aided in the furtherance of economic equalities, both between states and within them. And these equalities have bred resentments and depressed some social status. In other words, the mere objective of unification has not been enough to capture the imagination and allegiance of those left behind by social and economic changes. Building an idea of citizenship based not only on the ability to participate in the economic market would be a good place to rebuild the project. Restoring dignity to people whose sense of social status has been eroded as their economic security has declined would be another. But in the Netherlands, France, Hungary, Austria, Germany, indeed most of the EU states, far-right nationalist and populist groups have taken root since the end of the Cold War, slowly chipping away at the legitimacy of the EU. There has been a rise of nostalgia for the seeming certainties of the nation-state and a call to national memories that gave meaning to the collective past. And in the last few years, due to wars in the Middle East and the growth of Islamophobia, they have made even greater inroads. Organized and cooperative across national boundaries, the far right has fed on that discontent. And with the aid of new tools like social media, have spread their exclusionary nationalist message far and wide. Those pushing for Brexit had a revisionist history, a nostalgic vision of Britain for the British, well, England for the English really, that hasn't existed in a very long time and arguably never existed at all. Thank you.
Was that reading the last one?
No, that's someone's photoshopped.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought so.
Yeah.
What DHS? Sorry, I didn't.
National Health.
The National Health Service. Sorry. So the National Health Service, the health service, the socialized medicine. Medicare.
Oh, Medicare, okay. Well, they go ahead.
Yeah.
So, the situation is really confusing. We read a month in Scotland last year, where we found out mostly somewheres who were generally working class, but fiercely pro-EU.
Now Scotland is, yes, now Scotland.
And yet very nationalistic.
Yes.
So I suspect that one of the reasons for voting for the EU was because it wasn't what England wanted.
Yeah, so I said England for the English. The Leave campaign carried because England voted for it, right? England and Southern Wales. If you look at the percentage, in Northern Ireland, people mostly wanted to remain for very good reasons. For the last 20 years, there has been a reasonable settlement of the Irish troubles.
Yes.
This Brexit seat is going to is potentially blown up. Maybe not, but people were worried about the reconstruction of a hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland.
But Scotland's interesting.
Scotland wanted to stay.
By and large, people who would be populist by many of your criteria were pro-EU.
But they're pro-Scotland.
But they're also
They're
pro-Scotland.
Scottish nationalists.
And they're probably anti-England.
Exactly. Now, Scottish nationalism is very interesting because the home rule movement for Scotland, when it started back in the 1920s, was very much an ethnically nationalist movement. Over time, especially since the 1990s, they've become much more acidic nationalist movements. So Nicola Sturgeon, most of the Scottish national politicians are very cosmopolitan. They see the future of Scotland in Europe. They are not afraid of migrants to Scotland. You can come to Scotland and you can become Scottish. You don't have to be born here. Right? That wasn't the case in Scottish nationalism 50 years ago, but now it is. And it's partly, because all nationalism is us and them, it's partly a rejection of the English. But really, it's the English that drove Brexit.
Yeah, I'm just saying that the people we often hung up with they didn't mind immigrants,
Right.
and yet they were fiercely nationalistic. They otherwise were, sort of lower class, like fiercely Scottish nationalists, and yet they had this open view of immigration and belonging to the EU.
I mean, and that's in Scotland. That is definitely the case. In the wilds of England, in provincial cities, if you look at, I can show you a map of where Brexit is popular. If you look at the map of England, it's striking. The map of English Brexit is very much those that wanted to stay, to remain, were clustered around London, great provincial cities, places like Leeds and Manchester, and the university towns, Oxford and Cambridge, and a little bit around the home counties, a little bit in the southeast, and so the rest of it, all the rest of England, there was a majority, not always a big majority, but a small majority in favour of remaining. So small provincial cities, York and Newcastle, a whole bunch of cities in the north and centre of Britain, they all voted, sometimes overwhelmingly. And those are places that have suffered as a result of the decline of the national economy and the move to this global economy. People in London, cosmopolitan city, they're connected to the global marketplace. People in Bradford, much less so. Even though, say, a place like Bradford has a high immigrant population. There's a large Muslim population in Bradford. It's been there for a long time. And that's also an interesting thing about Brexit. There more recent populations to Britain split. You had some very influential and high-profile leavers who were from Pakistan originally, their families from Pakistan. But then most people who were recent arrivals to Britain, especially people from the old empire, the Commonwealth, wanted to remain, and they wanted Britain to remain. And there was, and I don't want to say it's all about one thing. There's lots of reasons why people might have chosen to leave what they wanted to leave. And some people thought that if we get out of, some people in new populations in Britain thought that if we leave the EU, then there'll be better connections to places like South Asia. We can have more people in South Asia, or we can get the best and brightest from all over the world. I think that's a bit of a delusion on their part, because I don't think the Brexiteers, people who are pushing for Brexit now, have that in mind at all. Many of the hard Brexiteers are anti-immigration, period. Britain is closed. We don't want more people. It's a small place. And we don't want more people.
It's still quite strange. I mean, the people on Coronation Street overwhelmingly have been
Coronation
for
Street.
Brexit. Yes. But the same working class citizens in a district in London would have voted to stay.
Yeah, it would be close in London. I mean, there's not a very big white working class left.
In South London.
So London, that's part of the problem, right? Working class people have been pushed out of cities like London and Paris to the suburbs or beyond, and there's a new class of often migrants who do menial jobs, who take or move into neighborhoods that were formerly white working class, and those white working class people resent that immensely. But they don't want to do the menial jobs that the immigrants are doing. So you get this situation of Paris and London are similar in the sense, they're just phenomenally expensive places to live. And the only people that live in the center of those cities are people who are connected to the global knowledge economy. They're professionals, they're entrepreneurs, etc., or government, or educators. And then people who quote unquote service them. You don't have, like you used to have in even to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, you don't have white working class neighborhoods in London anymore. They're very very difficult to find because there's no manufacturing, or very limited manufacturing. There's no those medium skilled jobs in cities like London and Paris. If you look at a map, I wish I thought, but if you look at a map of Le Pen's support in France, where more than 50% of the people who support, in any given district, who support Le Pen and the Front National live in old working class towns and districts in the northeast. It's striking. You look at and they're the most economically disadvantaged areas in France. And then there's a ring around Paris. Not Paris itself. Paris itself doesn't support Le Pen, but the neighborhoods beyond the neighborhoods where large regional populations from Algeria and other places are settled. Beyond that, then there's the areas where there's all this or pro-Le Pen, anti-establishments.
So, I was thinking when you showed, was it banks? You said facts.
Yes.
So, do facts really matter? I mean, if you're connecting with people emotionally, does the content of what you're saying, to what extent does that matter? Because I noticed that when it comes to, a lot of the people on the right, you look at Sarah Palin, she had these simple slogans like "Drill Baby Drill" or "Death Animals," things like that. That just really connected with people. Even liberals like Obama, Bill Clinton, I mean, they were able to. Obama had hope and change, and so he was able to do it through inspiration. But there was an emotionality, there was an undercurrent of emotionality that really drove the message across. So
sure, I'm not a political scientist, and I think but the idea that people are politically swayed only by rational arguments, I think, is got to be thrown out. People are not just swayed by rational arguments, but for democracies to work, there has to be some willingness to actually engage with the ideas of competing positions, right?
of course,
And what happens with why populists are slightly different is they just throw that out and say, no, we don't need to debate things rationally. We're going to appeal to emotional responses only. And and we just like Bo said, we have enough experts. We don't want to hear what the experts say. The experts could be right. Who cares? That's not what's important. It's what the people feel. It's this notion that but then it's the thing is that many people. I don't want to fall into this populist trap of seeing the people as just easily swayed by rhetoric and nonsense and appeals to unqualified process. But I think people, most people, are not inert, necessarily easily manipulated. People are stupid, right? People do think about what's in their best interests. That's part of politics. And what the populist message tries to drive home is that these people who debate these things in parliaments and legislatures, they don't care about you at all. They're just in it for themselves and other people anyway.
But I was just wondering, because you said that people who care about what's in their best interest, and I guess there's an element of rationality that comes in there. But if you use the emotional message to sort of convince them that something is in their best interest when it isn't, for instance, you have these people who were sending their young children to war in Iraq in 2004, and seeing people who were doing it, they eventually, a few months before the election, started talking about, well, gay people might start getting married. So they voted for the same people who were sending the kids to the war in Iraq for no reason. So there was even that idea of this is in your in your best self-interest is something that can be manipulated through, I guess, appealing to emotion. I wanted to, if you don't mind, I just wanted to share something that made me, like, when you were talking about that, when you were talking about facts and emotion, do you want to probably just read something? It's actually an excerpt from George Orwell's review of Mein Kampf in 1940.
Okay.
And it's a small paragraph, so let's read it now. He said that the fact is that there is something deeply appealing about him. This we're talking about him before 1940.
Yeah.
Not something deeply appealing about him. One feels it again when one sees his photographs. And I recommend, especially the photograph at the beginning of Hurston Blackett's edition, which shows Hitler in his early brown shirt days. It is a pathetic, dog-like face, the face of a man suffering under intolerable wrongs. In a rather more manly way, it reproduces the expression of innumerable pictures of Christ crucified. And there is little doubt that that is how Hitler sees himself. The initial personal cause of his grievance against the universe will only be guessed at. But at any rate, the grievance is there. He is the martyr, the victim, Prometheus chained to the rock, the self-sacrificing hero who fights single-handed against impossible odds. If you were killing a mouse, you would know how to make it look like, make it seem like a dragon. One feels out of the volume that he's fighting against destiny. He can't win, and that he somehow deserves it. The attraction of such a pose is, of course, enormous. Half the films that one sees turn upon some such theme. And so, I mean, that's it. You know, there's parallels that are talked about. I don't want to get into the whole,
Are you sure this is about Hitler not?
no, it's not, that's what I said.
That was.
I didn't want to get into Godwin's law. You're familiar with Godwin's law on the internet.
The
argument's
over. You both hit it, the argument's over.
Yeah.
And then how the gospel law.
But in actually after Charlottesville, Godwin himself tweeted.
This
"Go
is
ahead,
fine,
read it." And this is really about the rise. Of course, I don't have it.
Yeah.
I want to kind of get to just the appeal to the emotional part. I think that if you are responsible for your emotional appeal, like someone like Nadine or Obama or even to some extent Reagan, you're able to, that works. If you appeal to emotion alone, like populists like Hitler and that also works. But if you do rationality alone, just like Hillary Clinton did, for instance, like policy one, for some reason that falls short.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I mean, good politicians, good in the sense of being effective politicians, not necessarily good, effective politicians know how to harness, their charisma and appeals to, life experience and whatever to policy ideas, right? And that's what makes them good politicians. Populists don't care if they have, they are, whether by design or if they fall into it, they are appealing to emotion purely. It doesn't necessarily, not necessarily connected to a rational program or a positive set of policy objectives. That's what makes them populists as opposed to just democratic politicians.
Of course, from their point of view, they're being rational.
Of course.
Right.
If there weren't enough, more than enough blue-collar jobs to go around, what population still, which is a waste.
So I don't think it's not reducible just to economic insecurity.
You know, there's an economic fix to this.
There is, but there is, if the global economy hadn't created winners and losers, right? The last 30 years, 40 years of communist globalization, some people who neoliberalism, the opening up of markets, so that the free movement of capital, labor, and goods and services, right? And this has created winners and losers.
With concentration of capital, right, in so few hands, doesn't that accelerate this whole process?
Well, yeah, I think it does. I don't think people who are necessarily, buy into populist messaging they're not necessarily anti-affluence or anti-wealth. Right? This is not the same as sort of class conflict. It's sometimes portrayed as.
But isn't that because they don't know that you're targeted?
Well, yeah, I mean,
not pointing to the root cause of the
Sure, I mean- yeah, then you start falling into questions about, false concepts, and, what people will not really understand their own interests.
Yeah.
And as an historian, I am very reluctant to go there, only because that's asking to read people's minds, as opposed to sort of like trying to figure out evidence we have of their attitudes to everything else.
So I'm interested in comparing with the referendum that Northern Ireland had. They had a choice to leave Great Britain, the United Kingdom, and join the Republic. But they made a rational decision, and otherwise highly emotional population made an extremely rational decision to stay with the UK because it was economically and in all other ways in their best interest. Seeing like how ridiculous the economy of the Republic was at the time, and all the other examples they would lose, like healthcare and all of those things. But they ended up making a rational decision. So, and that was not like a million years ago, that was quite recent. So how does that compare to Brexit?
Well, but, I mean, it's a different kind of referendum. I mean, for one thing, the situation in Northern Ireland, where you have a sectarian divide, a very profound divide between populations, which is partly socioeconomic, partly religious, partly political. That, in the Good Friday Accord, really did put a break on that, right? I mean, so from the 1990s until very recently, there's growing hope in Northern Ireland that that history could be overcome, the bad history of the previous 70 years. The fact about the numbers for who in Northern Ireland voted to remain reflects that thing. I think young people in Northern Ireland now don't remember the troubles like their parents did, right? And so it was a rational decision for them to not want to leave the EU, and they didn't. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that when it comes to the Brexit vote, that lots of people didn't make rational decisions. I'm not saying everyone was swayed by emotion. The fact of the matter is that Brexit was won by a very small plurality. Right? Only 37% of the population who could vote actually voted to leave. And there's been talk since that there was a second referendum, maybe the result would be quite different. I don't actually believe it would be that different. I think it would probably be a similar kind of margin on the other side. Or not. Well, he knows. He says that. It's easy to say that when he knows it's not going to happen, right? And he's just being sticky in the eye of Tories, right? So that he can say, yes, we'll make this decision go, put the decision to bed. There'll be overwhelming numbers to vote for the leave. No one also believes that. If it was to happen again, it would be very close again. Could go either way. I think probably more people would say leave second round. A lot of people didn't vote in 2016.
More people would say,
No, more people would say remain. So a lot of people didn't vote in 2016 because they thought it was a whole other league, right? A significant number of people thought, why bother voting? Everyone's going to say they want to stay anyway. This